let's make sure that we all understand what's going on here. Because we read the big book together, we get a chance to study the steps in depth as we go. And there's no hit or miss here. We're reading it word for word, and we're considering these steps as we go through them. And of course, by doing it that way, we have a real strong in-depth look, not only the steps themselves, but how they fit together with all the other steps, and how they all work together as a wonderful program of recovery. And in the sixth chapter is where we're starting tonight. We're going to find pretty much the guts of the program of AA. The 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th steps are in this chapter. Of course, it all has a foundation in the first 4 steps. The 4th step, being in chapter 5, forms the pivot point for all the rest of the steps, because it is there that we learn how to do so many of the things that we're going to be doing for the rest of our lives. It's also in the 4th step that we learn about ourselves. We get to take a real close look at our present reality. We get to look to see what it is that's wrong with us, especially those things which block us off from God, will keep us therefore from recovery. And now when we get to the 5th step, we're going to be taking another great big leap forward, because it is here that we break the sound barrier. It is in the 5th step that we are instructed to take this incredible step of admitting what we have found in the 4th step, not only to ourselves and to God, but most especially to another human being. Now, this 5th step has an incredible history. It goes all the way back as far as we can trace the written record of mankind, especially in view of religions and philosophic concepts and ecclesiastical writings. We find the references to something akin to the 5th step in the Bible and the Koran and in Talmud. We find it in the writings of the Eastern religions. And it all comes back to something quite simple. As a matter of fact, in the Christian tradition, if we look in the book of James, we will find James saying, "Confess your sins one to another." And I believe it is in Romans where St. Paul does the same thing to the Romans, tells them the same thing. Now, why is it that this is such a powerful spiritual tool? I don't have any kind of a handle on any advanced wisdom or anything. I'm just going to tell you what I think. I believe that for most of us, it is to be the first time that we overcame our pride, the first time that we humbled ourselves enough, the first time that we felt completely necessary to reveal ourselves with no makeup on, with no costume hiding us, with no fancy story, just us bare bones to another human being. It's very unlikely that any of us have done that, even with our professional people out there. So many of us have spent time with counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists and others who were trying to help us with the human solution, and very seldom did we ever really break down and give them the whole story. But now, because we did our 4th step properly, we've learned so much about ourselves. And not only that, but hopefully the person who's sponsoring us has created in us sufficient sense of trust and confidence in that person that we're going to be willing to risk it. We're going to be willing to go that next big step where we lay it out, where we articulate precisely what we have found in our 4th step. Now, the big book is pretty clear about this, that if we don't do exactly that, we leave ourselves in great jeopardy. Page 72. Having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? We've been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. We have admitted certain defects. We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Please notice that Bill uses the word defects here, not wrongs, because wrongs are just a synonym for defects. Now these are about to be cast out. Whoa. The word now. This makes you wonder. We're only at the 5th step. Yeah, we're only 2 steps away from the 7th step, aren't we? As a matter of fact, we're going to see that we do 5, 6, and 7 on the same day. They all just fit together like fingers in a glove. This requires action on our part, which when completed will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs? No, our defects. Because that's what we're really talking about here. This brings us to the 5th step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. Okay, so now that's the preamble. And let's see what we're talking about here with this 5th step. How important is it? How vital is it? Why do we really have to do this? Can't we kind of skirt around on this? Can't we just maybe put it on tape and mail it to our sponsor? You mean I got to sit there and look somebody in the eye and go through all this stuff? Holy cow. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects with another person. You know, we've been running from that. We probably have done geographics to get away from having to admit our faults to anybody. Just get out of town and start fresh somewhere else. We never did truly learn, until after we got sober, that we could not leave ourselves behind. Every place we went, it was like we had some rickety old trailer hooked onto the back of our bumper and it just wouldn't let go. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects in another person. We think we have done well enough in admitting these things to ourselves. Oh, and then remember, you always hear this, well, I don't need to say anything to God. He already knows everything anyway. Oh, yeah? I guess there's something about that. And this 5th step picks up on it, doesn't it? That this admission is not just to ourselves or another human being, but it is an admission to God. And he tells us there's doubt about this. In actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons why we should do so. The best reason first. If we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. Oh, Bill, you should have said we will not. But he's being a little cautious here. The fact is that the 5th step is utterly required for sobriety. We may not overcome drinking. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is that they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves. Now, this next sentence is so important, especially in light of some of the stuff that floats around the rooms these days. There's these so-called principles behind the steps. Oh, yeah. Honesty is said to be the principle behind the first step. Humility is said to be the principle behind the seventh step. But what's the truth of it? They had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until what? Until they told someone else all their life story. Please turn that around. When we tell someone else all our life story, then we learn enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense it is necessary for this program. It is here in the fifth step that these sterling qualities, which are not principles, they're qualities of being, qualities of thinking, they're qualities of spirit, yes, but they're not principles. And there are no principles behind the steps. The steps are the principles are the steps. You cannot have a principle behind a principle. It doesn't work that way. And so here we think about this for a second though. You just turn that sentence around. When we do our fifth step, it is at that point that sufficient humility, fearlessness, and honesty becomes ours, because it is a gift which we are given because we have done this work. And those sterling qualities, as Bill calls them, are ours to keep if we will. And we get to carry them on with us from now on. And this accounts for a good part of the feeling that recovery is really setting in when we do our fifth step. We have a friend here tonight who did his fifth step today, and I dare say he would tell you the same thing I'm telling you right now, because he knows it just happened to him. It's an incredible experience. The inconsistency is made worse by the things he does on his sprees. Coming to his senses, he's revolted at certain episodes he vaguely remembers. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think someone might have observed him. As fast as he can, he pushes these memories far inside himself. He hopes they will never see the light of day. He is under constant fear and tension. That makes for more drinking. Wow, that's so true. And you know what we find? It's amazing what we find buried down there inside ourselves. We often around here we talk about the termites in our sub-basement, that you never see them, but they're eating everything away while they're down there. And once in a while you might see one fly by and think it belongs to your neighbor. We got these things so well hidden, so rationalized away, so pushed down to a point where we absolutely refuse to look at them. Denial is our middle name, of course. And yet, when we get into our fourth step and now stuff starts to come out, and now we're not only going to have to write about it, we're going to have to start talking about it. Psychologists are inclined to agree with us. We spent thousands of dollars for examinations. We know but few instances where we have given these doctors a fair break. We've seldom told them the whole truth, nor have we followed their advice. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, we were honest with no one else. Small wonder many in the medical profession have a low opinion of alcoholics and their chance for recovery. Well now, Bill, there's another real good reason. None of them have ever been successful getting us sober. Because they don't know how. When I read this paragraph, I think, Bill, you're pandering. You're pandering here, son. You just don't want these guys mad at you, because they're going to be a rich source, a gold mine of new bodies. Where's our newcomer? Is she here still? There she is. She, yeah. Here's the rule now. Notice there's a big must here. We must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world. Rightly and naturally we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom to take this intimate and confidential step. Boy, is that ever true. Now, when this was written in 1939, perhaps even as late as early 1940, I think it was in 39 though, after 3 years and 3 years plus of operation of the fellowship, it was very unusual in those days for the fifth step to be heard by another member. And they did not have sponsors as we know sponsors today. The first mention in the literature of sponsorship is not till 1947. There were, of course, spiritual advisors, but we see the mention of spiritual advisors in the book quite often, and this would seem to be more in the realm of someone who was in a church or temple or synagogue or cathedral or mosque or whatever. Somebody who was labeled as a spiritual advisor, or perhaps a doctor or a psychiatrist, or perhaps some real understanding close friend. But the practice of hearing fifth steps automatically, which is almost universally done today by the sponsor, had not yet been adopted. Those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires a confession must, and of course, will want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. Though we have no religious connection, we may still do well to talk with one ordained by an established religion. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problem. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand alcoholics. That's going to happen a lot. There's another reason there, isn't there? This minister or priest can't rat us out. Matter of fact, they can't be made to rat us out. Whereas our poor little sponsor, we tell him or her all these gory details, and the authorities can come along and stick them in prison if he won't rat us out. I know they did that to me. And so I suppose there's a certain amount of trepidation knowing that we're telling everything to somebody who may be vulnerable. Also, the idea of, here's something. If you really want to give your fifth step to somebody who is guaranteed not to rat you out, it's very simple. You just go down to the local hospice and find somebody who's going to die tonight. Hopefully somebody won't even talk back at you. They're pretty safe then. If we cannot or would rather not do this, we search our acquaintance for a closed-mouthed, understanding friend. Perhaps our doctor or psychologist will be the person. You notice it doesn't mention lawyers here? Yeah, I wonder why. Well, lawyers can't rat you out either, you know. Well, they can if you've told them that you're going to commit a crime, then they're supposed to rat you out. It may be one of our own family. Oh, God, save us from that. But we cannot disclose anything to our wives or our parents which will hurt them and make them unhappy. Well, of course not. But and that goes without saying, doesn't it? Because that would be in the nature of a ninth step, wouldn't it? And remember what our ninth step tells us, that we can't tell anybody anything that's going to hurt them. We're going to have to swallow it so we can't parade the horribles to our family and our intimate friends. We have no right to save our own skin at another person's expense. Such parts of our story we tell to someone who will understand and yet be unaffected. This is a kind of a neat little twist on the fifth step that isn't often talked about. The big book is authority for the fact that we can take our fifth step with two different people. And I suppose, by extension, a whole committee. Break it up into little parts. This way nobody knows the whole story, you know. That might not be a bad idea. Notwithstanding the great necessity for discussing ourselves with someone, it may be one is so situated that there is no suitable person available. If that is so, this step may be postponed, only, however, if we hold ourselves in complete readiness to go through with it at the first opportunity. We know we have people out there, the loners, that are isolated somewhere. They maybe are able to get to a meeting once or twice a year. There's a guy in Australia who has a sheep ranch way out there. This is the guy I keep talking about. He asked God to take his life and will into his hands, and he promised him he'd be happy no matter what God's will was. He ended up in the outback of Australia running a sheep farm with only Aborigines for neighbors, and he doesn't speak their language. But once a year at shearing time, at bull time, he'd get his sheep all sheared, and he'd make the trip about 2,000 miles into the nearest big city to sell his wool. And it was on those trips that he was able to meet with other alcoholics and to do, for example, his fifth step. Now this big book, believe it or not, was written precisely for him. Think about it for a second. When this book was written, it was going out to people who had no AA in their towns, or nobody even knew about AA. It was going out to the soul, lonely drunk out there who was looking for some kind of recovery. In fact, if you read the 11th chapter closely, as we're going to do when we get there, you'll find that a good part of it is written to show these lone wolves out there in Cucamonga and in Grand Prairie and wherever else the big book ended up, how to set up their own AA meeting in their own towns. And of course it was quite effective in doing that. This step may be postponed only, however, if we hold ourselves in complete readiness to go through with it first opportunity. Now this, by the way, is directly parallel to our ninth step. Remember, we get to the ninth step in a couple of weeks. Maybe next week, I don't know. Probably a couple of weeks. What we're going to find is that the key to being set free from our guilt is our willingness, complete willingness to make amends if, as and when we can. And sometimes we can't do it. But if we are truly willing, what happens there is that we are set free from the guilt. And so this is the same idea. Remember how important willingness is. Remember how important it is to have this attitude that I am willing to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. We say this because we're very anxious to talk to the right person. It is important that he be able to keep a confidence, that he fully understand and approve what we're driving at, that he will not try to change our plan. But we must not use this as a mere excuse to postpone, and boy, that would be easy to do. When we decide who is to hear our story, we waste no time. We have a written inventory, and we are prepared for a long talk. See, now that gives us a little clue here as to how we're going to go about this fifth step. We're going to use our four-step inventory. Now, the inventory is not the fifth step. Reading the inventory is not a fifth step. But it's a large aid in making sure that the fifth step gets done properly. We don't have anything here that tells us precisely how to go about it. So experience is a very good teacher. The experience of those of us who've been around for a while is if we utilize the inventory just in the order in which it was written, that seems to work very well. Let me give you an example. Suppose we start out with the fifth step, and the first thing we're talking about is resentment. And we may find that, let's say Mama is the first resentment. Talk about Mama, and then Papa comes right into the conversation, and then brothers and sisters, maybe other family members. We follow that train of thought all the way through until it peters out. And then we go back to see if we've missed anybody. And then we start again, and we follow the next train of thought through. And by doing this way, we're not going to miss anybody. We have a written inventory and we're prepared for a long talk. We explain to our partner what we are about to do and why we have to do it. Now this is really important. If you're talking to somebody who is not familiar with the program, who has not worked the steps, maybe someone who has heard a couple of 5th steps but is not really up on what's going on, it's important to understand what you're trying to do. If it's your 5th step, you're trying to save your life. And you recognize the truth of what the Big Book has told us, that we must be entirely honest with somebody if we are to live long and happily in this world. And so we're going to pick out someone to do this with. If they are not familiar with what the 5th step is and what it's designed to accomplish, we need to let them know. If you're a sponsor and you have somebody who is a sponsee who is going to be doing their 5th step with, let's say, a clergyman, ask if you can provide your sponsee with a little letter which sets forth the purposes and the aims and the end result that we're seeking with a 5th step, so that the person who is hearing their 5th step will be acquainted with what's going on and be looking for the right stuff. Now remember that many clergymen may be looking at the 5th step as simply a confession. But it's much more than that. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. And once we've taken this step, withholding nothing, we're delighted. Those two words, withholding nothing, of course, are really part and parcel, aren't they, of the instructions for working the 5th step. But that's the whole 5th step. Illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. We are letting it all out. Now then, here's something really very fascinating and wonderful about the steps. We're told what to do, and then immediately we're told what's going to happen if we do it. Once we've taken the step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We're not walking around hang-dog. We're not dodging people. We're not dodging circumstances. We're not dodging creditors or phone calls. We're standing up. All of a sudden we find ourselves on our own 2 feet, actually functioning as adults. We just climbed out of the sandbox. We're no longer playing dodgeball with all those nasty people out there. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. How many of us could do that when we walked in the door? Didn't we do just about anything that we could possibly think of in order to avoid being alone? I remember the last 6 months of drinking, I couldn't take a shower because I couldn't stand to be alone in that shower. I took sitz baths or, sink baths. And I don't suppose I smell too good either. Nobody ever said anything about it. But I was afraid to be alone. Now, it gets to a point where we treasure the times that we can be alone. We treasure those times. And we get busy enough, and they come very seldom. But when we get to have them, boy, that's wonderful stuff. Now then, remember when we were back there in the 4th step, we talked about fears. Remember that? We talked about the spiritual solution for fear. Let's remember what it is. Fear, recognized and written down, and discussed with another person, and turned over to God, equals no fear. Well, now here we find the culmination of that spiritual remedy. We have found our fears in the 4th step. We've asked God to remove them. At once we commenced to outgrow them, but here in the fifth step we have admitted them, we've discussed them with another human being, and what happens? Our fears fall from us. And this is something that is of inestimable value because we get to carry this with us for the rest of our lives. Remember that every time we feel threatened, there's a fear that's likely to crop up. And fear warps and perverts us. Fear is our enemy, an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our lives is shot through with us, the big book says. Even if we're only living in a house full of fear, or working in a fear-filled environment, or spending a lot of time with someone who is extremely fearful. Fear is so contagious. Like the Asian flu, you get enough contact and you're going to get it. And so fear is there, and fear is something that we have to be willing and now we are able to deal with it. And we don't pander to some human solution stuff like you got to walk through fear, and not when we have a spiritual solution to fear. Why would we do that? If I can be free of fear, why would I have to walk through it? That's probably too logical, right? Our fears fall from us. And that's the truth. Now we take that little formula and we use it from here on out, and this allows us to stay free of fear as we go. Let's go to the next one. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. That's real important. Read Spiritual Experience for Spiritual Awakening. Remember that when Bill originally wrote the big book, the 12th step was written having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps. That was changed by the editorial board to Spiritual Awakening. Bill always meant the combination of spiritual experiences building up over a period of time would be the spiritual experience, in a big capital THE, the spiritual experience. They changed that to Spiritual Awakening. That's what Bill is talking about here. Now we begin to have a spiritual experience. He's saying to us that right here in the fifth step, our spiritual awakening begins strongly. We begin to really be aware of it. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. So you see how far we've come from a place of rebellion and defiance and denial back there in the first step? We've come all this way. And yet there's much left to do. Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour. This is the only specific time limit in the big book in terms of minutes or hours or days. But this is very specific. Between the third and the fourth step, remember the time limit is at once. So there's not even an hour there. We have to at once begin our inventory. Of course that doesn't mean eo instante. It means, but let's do it right away so we don't screw around with this. But here we have an hour. Now we've finished our fifth step. And we're going to take the next hour immediately following our fifth step, carefully reviewing what we've done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. That's real important. Because we do. Look what's already happened. We feel we're on a broad highway. We feel we're having a spiritual experience. Our spiritual beliefs are being coalesced here. So we thank God for that. And as a result of working these steps up to this point, this has happened to us. Taking this book down from a shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. So carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we're building an arch to which we shall walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? And if we can answer to our satisfaction that We have done a thorough fifth step. We already have come to the conclusion that it's absolutely essential that we be freed from these defects of character. And at that point, we are ready to move on to our sixth and seventh steps. And now on page 76, if we can answer to our satisfaction, then we look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Those admissions were made in the fifth step, weren't they? And we wrote them out in the fourth step. And now are we willing and ready to have God remove all those things, all those defects of character? Can He take them all? Every one? Do we see any kind of equivocation there? Do we see any sort of weasel words there? Is there any out clause there? No. This sixth step is designed specifically to do two things. One, to state the obvious being that as a result of our fourth and fifth step, we have become ready to have God take these things that are killing us, that are blocking us from Him. But in the off chance that we are not ready and willing, it is also designed to give us the solution to that problem, which is stated in the next sentence. If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. The sole and single solution to the lack of readiness or willingness to let go of our defects of character is to pray for the willingness. This is the seventh step. It's one paragraph of 7 lines, and it is a prayer. When ready, we say something like this: My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. Now, just to make sure that we understand where this came from and how far we have progressed since the third step, let's go back to page 63 and take a look. And I want you to compare these two prayers, and you will see that we're asking exactly the same thing here, but now in the seventh step we're asking it with knowledge of what's wrong with us, which is what we had to do. We had to face so we could then be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. The middle paragraph on page 63. Third step prayer. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, and we read difficulties to be defects of character, insanities, and guilt. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help. Of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life may I do Thy will always. Now in this seventh step prayer then, which by the way is a prayer which we're going to offer up with all humility. And by the way, when Bill first wrote this, in the original version of the seventh step prayer, or the seventh step, he had written humbly on our knees, and the editorial board took out the on our knees part. They didn't like that very well. In other literature, the seventh step is said to be all about humility. Well, I would hope that when we pray with great humility. But it's no more about humility than any other prayer. In fact, humility is what we learned in the fifth step. Remember, we went over that when we studied the fifth step together on page 73. So now we have the seventh step, and it is a prayer, and we've asked God to take away every single defect of character which stands between us, which stands in the way of our usefulness to God and to our fellows. To put this in context, let's go over to top of page 77. We'll get to this again, but I want to show you how these tie together. Top of page 77. At the moment, we're trying to put our lives in order. But this is not an end in itself. Now here it goes. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. You see how that fits exactly with the 7-step prayer. Take away my difficulties. Take away every single defect of character. Same thought. It stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows because my real purpose here is to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the people about me. Now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Please notice that the Big Book constantly ties action in with that phrase. Faith without works is dead means, at least to a large extent, action. Works meaning action. Faith without the action of faith is dead. And one could say that what this really means is that faith without actively trusting God is dead. In other words, we act in light of the fact that we trust that God will be there for us, that we are in His care and protection. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we've harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. So I guess we've settled that question pretty clearly, that the 4th step is where the 8th step is done. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, that means if we haven't the will to go out and try to straighten stuff out, to make amends, if we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. Probably there's some misgivings, but we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we've hurt. We may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Let us be reassured. To some people we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. We might prejudice them. At the moment we're trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. It is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we've gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message. But our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. He's going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than in our talk of spiritual discoveries. We don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God when it will serve any good purpose. We're willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. The question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. It may be he has done us more harm than we've done him. And by the way, it may very well be that he's done all the harm and we've done none. We may have wronged this person in other ways. And sometimes the harm is the harm which would have been suffered by us if it had been done to us. We don't try to guess whether the person we're making amends to was actually hurt by us or not. We don't know that. What we do know is that if our actions toward them were done to us, that we would be harmed. That's the only gauge we have which has any validity. Don't let your sponsees get away with this. Oh, well, you know, that was all consensual, and there was nothing there that bothered her. That I know. Look at what she did to me, and on and on. We say, nope. If that was done to you, would it hurt you? Yes, it would. Good. Then you're going to make amends. Though we may have acquired a better attitude toward him, we are still not keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. It is harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. Now that last sentence is important because it identifies another species of one could say another species of guilt, where we haven't necessarily done anything overt to the person, but we've been carrying bad feelings about them for a long time. You notice what it tells us. We confess our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. Why do you suppose the big book says love and tolerance of others is our code? There's nothing there about shouting, yelling, being sarcastic, controlling another human being. That's not our job as sponsors. Tough love is an oxymoron. So we're not going to do anything here to criticize or make wrong the person we're making amends to. Now there's another basic rule in making amends. That we are not permitted to do anything which will harm the other person or a third person, except when to do so would injure them or others. The them is the person we're making amends to, the others are third persons who could be caught up in the drama of our amends. For example, let us suppose that I'm making amends to my parents, and they've had to live with my alcoholism and all that entails for all these years. They've lived through some horrible times with me, and yet they were able to hang in there. Or maybe they weren't. Maybe they kicked me out. But nevertheless, they have lived through some horrible times with me. My inclination would be, if I get them to sit down, I want to go through that point by point, confessing all the things that I did that were wrong, so that when I get through with all this, I can walk away a free man. But look what I have done. I have made them relive the horrors of the past. In most cases, that's not going to be right. That's going to be wrong to do that. In most cases, when we make amends, we do not need to be specific about the wrongs we've committed, unless the other person wants to do that, unless the other person invites it. And even then, it's important to soft pedal this stuff, because we are not permitted to harm another person. Now, the Big Book gives us several different categories of this rule. For example, in the section having to do with making amends for criminal acts, it may well be that for us to turn ourselves in would seriously injure members of our family or people who depend on us. it also talks about this in terms of where we've had affairs, where there's been cheating going on. And to bring the third person into this, or to dwell too much upon the hurt that the spouse suffered, would be wrong. We don't have the right to bring the third person in and make that third person suffer in order for us to feel better. So you see, this cuts across the whole gamut of amends, but it even goes further than that. We have to accept that this is a spiritual principle which applies to everything we do in life. We are not permitted to harm another person. Now there is a corollary to this principle, and the corollary is that we are not permitted to allow another person to harm us. The days of being a victim are over with. If I'm allowing you to harm me, I am allowing you to do things which will block me from God, which means that automatically I'm no longer growing spiritually. I have ceased to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and to others. So I'm going to have to learn to say, stop right there. No, 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 we'll have none of this. And if it doesn't stop, we have to get away. Sometimes it's a hard choice, because sometimes it's a situation where it may be very difficult for us to get away. Nevertheless, the principle remains. If we're being harmed by another person, in one way or another, we need to put a stop to that. So those are the sort of the basic ideas and imprimaturs that go with the whole idea of making amends. On page 78, right at the top of the page, second line, his faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we'll be gratified with the results. Now it tells us that 9 cases out of 10 the unexpected happens. Usually it's not going to be anywhere near as bad as we anticipated. Rarely it says, do we fail to make satisfactory progress? Our former enemies sometimes praise what we are doing and wish us well. Occasionally they will offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We've made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam. And it says most alcoholics owe money. That's certainly true. We do not dodge our creditors. I guess some of them we've been running from for years. How many people come in here owing Uncle Sam money? And credit cards, and all kinds of stuff. And how many of us, before we came in here, wouldn't answer the telephone for fear it was another collection agency? Telling them what we are trying to do, we make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. Nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory it may cause financial harm. Approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. See what they're saying here is we're going to these people and we're making no bones about the fact, number one, and this is most important, that we owe money. We're acknowledging the debt. And we're also telling them that we are alcoholics, that we're in recovery. And one of the things about our recovery that teaches us there is that we're to make amends and to pay our debts. That it is of critical importance to us that we reestablish our credibility in life. And we do not find a way to rationalize this. We just meet it head on. Arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we are sorry. Now, our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go. For we're liable to drink if we are afraid to face that. And that's a big amen to that. Perhaps we've committed a criminal offense, which might land us in jail if we're known to the authorities. We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We have already admitted this in confidence to another person, but we are sure we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. Maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account. Most of us have done that sort of thing. Maybe we are divorced and have remarried, but haven't kept up the alimony, number one. She's indignant about it and has a warrant out for our arrest. That's a common form of trouble, too. That's pretty mild stuff, Bill. There's a lot more than that floating around these rooms. Although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding. Remind ourselves that we've decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. We ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. We may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we're willing. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything. And usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. A man we know had remarried. Because of resentment and drinking, he had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life, had secured a position, and was getting his head above water. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked up to the judge and said, "Here I am." We thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary. But if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. We suggested he write his first wife admitting his faults and asking forgiveness. He did, and also sent a small amount of money. He told her what he would try to do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course she did not. And the whole situation has long since been adjusted. Before taking drastic action which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. If we have obtained permission, have consulted with others, ask God to help, and the drastic step is indicated, we must not shrink. This brings to mind a story about one of our friends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival, giving him no receipt for it. He subsequently denied having received the money and used the incident as a basis for discrediting him. He thus used his own wrongdoing as a means of destroying the reputation of another. In fact, his rival was ruined. He felt that he had done a wrong he could not possibly make right. If he opened that old affair, he was afraid it would destroy the reputation of his partner, disgrace his family, and take away his means of livelihood. What right had he to involve those dependent upon him? How could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival? After consulting with his wife and partner, he came to the conclusion that it was better to take these risks than to stand before his Creator guilty of such ruinous slander. He saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands, or he would soon start drinking again and all would be lost anyhow. He attended church for the first time in many years. After the sermon, he quietly got up and made an explanation. His action meant widespread approval, and today he's one of the most trusted citizens of his town. All this happened years ago. The chances are that we have domestic troubles. Perhaps we're mixed up with women in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. We doubt it. We doubt if, in this respect, alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people. But drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. After a few years with an alcoholic gets worn out, the wife gets worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative. How could she be anything else? The husband begins to feel lonely, sorry for himself. He commences to look around in the nightclubs or their equivalent or something besides liquor. Besides, he's having a secret, perhaps he's having a secret exciting affair with a girl who understands. In fairness, we must say that she may understand. What are we going to do about a thing like that? A man so involved often feels very remorseful at times, especially if he's married to a loyal and courageous girl who had literally gone through hell for him. Whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. Here comes some rules. If we are sure a wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always, we think. If she knows in a general way that we have been wild, should we tell her in detail? Undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. She'll want to know who the woman is and where she is. We feel we ought to say to her we have no right to involve another person. We are sorry for what we've done, and God willing it shall not be repeated. More than that we cannot do. We have no right to go further. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, we have often found this the best course to take. Well, what's behind that rule is simple enough, isn't it? And it's stated in the ninth step itself, may recommend such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. That is, injure the person we're making amends to, or third people, third parties. Our design for living is not a one-way street. It is as good for the wife as for the husband. If we can forget, so can she. It is better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. Now you see that the same rule applies to the family as does to we alcoholics when we first come in. Remember, we referred to this before, but in chapter 7, in talking about the newcomer, we're instructed that once we have given them the big book to read and they've expressed a desire to go further, that we're not to press them or push them or urge them. And it tells us why. That if they are to find God, the desire must come from within. And the same thing is true here of the families. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will change in time. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. There's a big amen to that, guys. Go right back to the third step prayer. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. In other words, let my actions speak. Let me be an example to the people I wish to help of God's power and His love and His way of life working in and through me, so that perhaps if they see the action I take, they see the way I live my life, perhaps they will want that too. And so we're going to teach and we're going to bring the message by example, probably more than anything else. And with the family, we're in close contact with them. They're going to see the difference in the way we live our lives. And they will change in time. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. And it's also very good to keep in mind that if we wish to know about someone else, we need to watch what they do. Their words are going to be not nearly as convincing as their actions. We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. And there may be some wrongs we can never fully right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter. And there may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases. But we don't delay if it can be avoided. And by the way, in sending out these letters, sometimes we don't even have an address. But it's still a good idea to write the letter. We want to get this stuff out of our heads and down on paper. It's so important to do that. We write down in the letter exactly what we'd say if we had them in front of us. And by doing that, we demonstrate even further our willingness to make amends. Sometimes it's a really good idea where we have a tough amends to make to write the letter, even though we know we're going to talk to the person face to face. It helps us to organize what we wish to say. And to keep it in some kind of a reasonable amount of words, because we don't want amends to be some lengthy diatribe. We do not want to parade the horribles. We do not want to make people we've harmed have to relive the horrors of the past. We want to make sure that they understand that we're sincerely sorry for what we've done. We're going to make every effort not to ever repeat what we've done. And that we want to be able to say to them, what can I do to be helpful to you? There may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases, but we don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble, without being servile or scraping. In other words, we are not to be kowtowing. We are not to be tugging at our forelocks. We're not to be on our knees or on our faces, crawling around. We're standing up.